The head is the first thing, before the tail, before the vast dark cylinder of the body, before any understanding of what this animal is, or how it moves, or what it does in the deep water miles below. There is the head. It rises from the ocean like a blunt wall. It does not taper. It does not curve into a pointed snout, the way a dolphin's does, or arch upward into the rounded melon of a humpback. It ends in a flat vertical face, squared off as if something enormous and deliberate pressed against it from the front and simply stopped it there. From the side, the shape is unmistakable, a long dark rectangle with a rounded underside and a forward face so flat and so high that the animal seems less like a creature and more like a structure, something architectural, something that was built rather than born. The head of an adult male sperm whale can measure nearly 20 feet from that flat front face to the point where the body narrows and the back begins. It is the largest head of any animal that has ever lived, and most of it, the forward third, the bluntest part, the part that meets the ocean first, is not muscle and not bone and not the dense tissue of jaw and tongue. It is oil, pale, waxy, faintly yellowish in color. The spermaceti organ fills the forward section of the head in a volume that can hold several hundred gallons in a large adult male. It sits inside a structure something like an enormous cushioned case, bounded above and to the sides by thick walls of fibrous tissue, held in its shape by the architecture of the skull behind it. The oil itself is unusual. At the temperature of a living whale's body, near the surface of the ocean in warm water, it is liquid, slightly viscous, faintly translucent, moving slowly if the head is tilted. In colder water, or when cold seawater is circulated through narrow passages running alongside the organ from the whale's left nostril, the oil begins to solidify. Its density increases. The change is small and gradual, not dramatic. The organ does not freeze, and the whale does not feel pain. But the physics of that small change in density in an organ this large may matter. The best current picture, and it is still a picture under revision, is that a denser spermaceti organ may help the whale descend, its head growing slightly heavier as cold water moves through and the wax thickens, and that a warmer, less dense organ may assist in rising again. Whether this is the organ's primary purpose, or one function among several, or a consequence of design that serves another end entirely, is not settled. What is known is that the organ is there, vast and pale, and chemically responsive to temperature, and that sperm whales dive deeper and more reliably than almost anything else alive, and that the two facts exist in the same animal. The whalers who killed sperm whales by the tens of thousands across the 18th and 19th centuries prized this oil above almost all others. They called the whale the spermaceti whale, named for the organ they were after. The oil burned cleanly in lamps. It lubricated fine machinery without thickening in cold. They did not know what the organ did for the animal. They could not have known. They were taking it to fill the lamps of cities, and the whale's biology was secondary to the light it would produce. The organ was simply there, pale and soft inside the enormous head, and they rendered it in pots on the deck and filled their barrels and moved on. The animal beneath the organ, the living, breathing, diving, echolocating creature that had carried that wax through the deep ocean for decades before they found it, was not the subject of their attention. It was the subject of their harpoons. The squared-off head, seen from a distance across calm water, is the first visible sign that a sperm whale has come to the surface. The flat front face breaks the waterline before anything else does. The blow, when it comes, leans forward and to the left, a distinctive asymmetry among large whales, a consequence of the single functional nostril positioned toward the left side of that great rectangular face. The blow leans at roughly a 45-degree angle, dispersing into vapor in the open air, and then the head rests for a moment, breathing before the long back rises slowly and the animal exhales again. It is patient at the surface. It takes its time. The surface is not where it lives. The surface is where it breathes. Everything about the body of a sperm whale is a negotiation between the world above the surface and the world below it, between the open air where oxygen can be found and the deep cold water where food waits in the dark. That negotiation has been ongoing for a very long time. The ancestors of modern sperm whales entered the ocean somewhere between 50 and 40 million years ago, and in the time since, the body has been reshaped by the pressure of the deep in ways that are visible in the bone and muscle and blood written into the tissue, present in every cell, accumulated across a span of time, so long it is nearly impossible to hold in the mind as a single thing. What the body is now is the result of that long, slow pressure. The deep ocean changed it. It kept what worked and released what did not. And what remains is an animal that can travel 1 mile straight down into cold and crushing dark and return to the surface alive, having eaten, ready to breathe and descend again. The rib cage of a sperm whale does not behave the way a mammal's rib cage behaves on land. On land, a rib cage is a rigid structure. It bends slightly with each breath. It expands and contracts, but it holds its shape. It protects what is inside. If pressure is applied from the outside, it resists. It was built to resist. The air-breathing creatures of the land have always been surrounded by air, which presses equally in all directions and offers no crushing force. And so a rib cage that holds firm against pressure is the correct design. But a sperm whale descending through the ocean column carries a different problem. Water is nearly incompressible. Pressure at depth is not atmospheric. It multiplies with every meter of descent, rising by roughly 1 atmosphere for every 10 meters of water overhead. At 1,000 meters, where a sperm whale hunts on an ordinary afternoon, the pressure is 100 times what it is at the surface. That pressure presses inward from every direction simultaneously, with a force that would shatter a human rib cage long before the animal reached anything close to that depth. The sperm whale's rib cage does not shatter, it bends. The joints where the ribs meet the cartilage connecting them to the sternum are flexible in a way that the same joints in a land animal are not, built to hinge rather than to hold, to yield under pressure rather than to resist it. As the whale descends and the water overhead accumulates, the rib cage begins to fold inward, not violently, not suddenly, slowly, steadily, pressing inward from all sides at once. The chest wall yields the way a slow accordion yields when both hands press it from the ends. The lungs compress. The air inside them is forced into smaller and smaller spaces. The blood and tissue around them adjust. Nothing fractures. Nothing tears. The body simply becomes smaller in the right place at the right time. And when the whale surfaces and the pressure releases, the rib cage opens again, the lungs expand, and the breathing continues. The design is not clever in any intentional sense. It is simply the form that survived. Every ancestor that could not do this did not come back from the deep, and over millions of years, the hinged rib cage became what sperm whales have. Inside the muscle tissue, another adaptation works more quietly than the collapsing chest, but carries as much of the story. The muscle of a sperm whale is dark. Not the reddish brown of beef, not the pale pink of fish. Dark, deeply, nearly black in the thickest masses of the trunk and the base of the tail, the color of old iron or very dark soil. The color comes from myoglobin, a protein that binds oxygen and holds it at the level of the individual muscle fiber. In human muscle, myoglobin is present, but in modest concentrations. In sperm whale muscle, the concentration is roughly 10 times greater. The tissue is saturated with it. Each fiber is packed with tiny molecular reservoirs of bound oxygen, available to be released when the muscle needs it and the blood supply has thinned. The darkness of the muscle is not incidental. It is the pigment of the myoglobin itself, visible because there is so much of it. A cross-section of the tailstock of a large sperm whale looks almost like a mineral in low light, like something that was pressed and compacted rather than grown, and in a sense it was uncompressed by selection over tens of millions of years, each generation slightly better at holding oxygen in the muscle, each slight improvement lasting, accumulating, darkening. Myoglobin holds oxygen locally, but the whale also needs oxygen carried throughout the body, to the brain, the heart, the organs, across the full duration of a dive that can last an hour or more without a breath. For this, the blood itself has been modified. Sperm whale blood carries hemoglobin at concentrations higher than the blood of most land mammals, including humans. More hemoglobin means more oxygen bound and carried per unit of blood. Beyond the concentration, the blood volume itself is large relative to the animal's body mass, a proportionally greater total supply, circulating through a proportionally greater network of vessels. The blood is, in effect, a mobile oxygen tank. Dense with hemoglobin, abundant in volume, it moves through the body during a dive as a traveling reservoir, depleting slowly as the tissues draw on it, holding enough to sustain the animal across the full depth of the dive and back. The deep red of hemoglobin, concentrated in the blood of a large whale, would look near black in bulk. The whole interior of the animal, in this light, is shadowed by the presence of oxygen, stored in the muscle, carried in the blood, enough of it carefully enough distributed to make the mile-deep dive possible. The blood does not simply circulate during a dive as it does at the surface. The body changes what it does with the blood depending on where the animal is in the water column and how long it has been there. When a sperm whale begins a deep dive, a cascade of physiological responses begins, most of them automatic, most of them initiated by sensors in the blood and the nervous system that detect the changes in pressure and oxygen availability as the descent continues. Among the most important of these responses is a slowing of the heart. At the surface, a resting sperm whale has a heart rate of roughly 25 to 30 beats per minute, already slow by mammalian standards, already a quiet rhythm. As the animal descends and the dive deepens, the heart rate falls further. By the time the whale reaches hunting depth, the heart may be beating as few as 4 to 8 times in a single minute. 4 beats in 60 seconds. The heart contracting once and then pausing, once and then pausing, in a silence that is almost not a rhythm at all, but is still enough to keep the blood moving, to keep the brain alive, to keep the oxygen circulating to the places it is most needed. This is diving bradycardia, the reflex slowing of the heart during submersion, and it is not unique to sperm whales. It occurs in most diving mammals and many diving birds, and even in humans to a modest degree. But in the sperm whale, it drops the heart rate to a fraction of the surface rate, and it is paired with another reflex that works in parallel. As the heart slows, the blood vessels serving the outer muscles, the skin, and the fins constrict. Blood withdraws from the periphery. The tail continues its slow strokes, but the muscle tissue driving it receives less blood than it would at the surface. It draws instead on the local myoglobin reservoir, running on stored oxygen rather than circulating blood. The blood that might otherwise be spread across the entire body is held more tightly near the center, routed toward the brain, toward the heart, toward the organs that cannot function without continuous supply. It is a triage performed automatically, calibrated by the depth and duration of the dive, maintaining the most critical functions while allowing everything else to run on reserve. The whale descending through 500 meters carries this redistribution underway in every vessel. The heart beats slowly at the center of the massive chest, 4 times in a minute, 5, each contraction a deliberate and unhurried event. The brain, cradled inside the great rectangular head, receives its blood and remains alert, navigating the darkness, interpreting echoes, pursuing the business of the deep water with a clarity that the body's outer simplicity does not betray. From outside the animal, descending in the black water at 1,000 meters, the whale would appear nearly still. The tail moves, the fins hold their angle, the great blunt head points slightly downward into the dark. There is almost no sound from the body itself, only the regular pulse of clicks departing into the water ahead, the voice of the animal in the only medium where its voice can travel. The spermaceti organ at the front of that head has been growing colder during the descent. Cold water, pulled through the passages that run alongside it, has been exchanging heat with the wax, drawing the temperature of the oil downward, slowly thickening it. The organ's density shifts by a small amount, not enough to be visible, not enough to feel abrupt, but enough, over the length of a deep dive, to change the balance of the animal in the water column. A slightly denser head in an animal this large represents a real physical force. It may help the whale stay neutrally buoyant at depth, holding its position in the water without the constant muscular effort that would otherwise be required. And when the dive ends, when the whale turns upward and begins the long ascent, warm blood may be routed back into the passages alongside the organ, reheating the wax, lightening the head, making the rise a little easier. The mechanism is elegant in the way that old solved problems are elegant, not with any intention, but with the simple efficiency of a design that has been tested for millions of years against the hardest conditions the ocean can produce. There is a depth at which the sperm whale is neither rising nor falling, neutrally buoyant, the weight of the body exactly equaled by the buoyancy of the fluids and the partially compressed air spaces inside it. The whale can hold position in the water column without swimming. It is just below the thermocline, where the temperature drops sharply and the cold water begins in earnest, at a depth that varies with season and latitude, but often falls somewhere near 200 to 300 meters. Below this, the whale is denser than the water and must work to rise. Above it, the water is warmer and the animal is lighter and must work to descend. The spermaceti organ's contribution to this balance is not entirely understood, but the organ's behavior during dives suggests it participates in the calculation. An animal capable of fine control over its own buoyancy is an animal that can spend time at hunting depth without wasting energy, resting, listening, waiting, without fighting the water to stay in place. The fighting, such as it is, belongs to other moments. The descent itself is work, the enormous tail driving the body downward at a pace of roughly 150 meters per minute on a directed dive, covering the first mile below the surface in about 10 minutes. 10 minutes of sustained swimming into increasing pressure, decreasing temperature, and absolute darkness. The whale's eyes on the sides of its head are functional, but offer little in an environment with no light. The acoustical landscape is what matters here, the returning echoes, the texture of the sound field, the patterns and the clicks that bounce back from the water column ahead. But the body that travels through that darkness, that makes that descent possible at all, is a body built for exactly this. The collapsing rib cage, the black muscle, the dense blood, the slowing heart. These are not workarounds. They are not compromises between a terrestrial body and an aquatic one. They are the solution, arrived at across deep time, present in every animal of this species, alive in every ocean on the planet. The body built for the abyss. There is something worth dwelling on in the image of that slowing heart. Not the hunt, not the prey waiting in the dark ahead, not the clicks departing into the water column, just the heart itself, the muscle at the center of the animal, working with less urgency as the depth increases. At the surface, the heart beats at the pace of arresting humans, perhaps a little slower, steady, metronomic, ordinary. At 100 meters, it has slowed. At 300 meters, it has slowed further. At 600 meters, at 800, at 1,000, it is beating at the pace of a slow clock in a quiet room, 4 times, 5 times. The spaces between the beats are long. The body around the heart is cold. The water pressing on every surface of the animal is cold and absolute and pressing harder than anything on the surface. World presses, and inside it, at the center of all that mass and pressure and dark, the heart continues, patient, deliberate, meeting exactly the body's need, and not one beat more. The muscle around the heart is itself full of myoglobin, darkly saturated, holding oxygen against the long duration of the dive, releasing it slowly into the cardiac tissue that cannot stop working even for a moment. The heart is not drawing on circulating blood the way it would at the surface. It is drawing on what it holds inside itself, the local reservoir, the dark protein in every fiber, ready to give up its oxygen when asked. The heart beats, the blood moves, the brain remains alert in the enormous head, making its calculations in the dark. And the rest of the body, the skin, the outer muscles, the long smooth flanks that move through the water with so little turbulence, is held on minimal supply. Quiet, still, waiting for the ascent. It is this stillness that is perhaps the most unexpected thing about an animal this large in motion. A sperm whale descending to 1,000 meters is not thrashing or laboring. The tail strokes are long and slow and powerful, driving the body downward with the minimum energy needed for the depth. There is no flailing, there is no visible effort. The animal moves through the water the way a very large and well-designed thing moves through a medium it has always lived in, with a settled, unhurried efficiency that has taken millions of years to arrive at this form, and will not be hurrying now. The rib cage has folded, the heart has slowed, the blood has gathered inward, the muscle is running on reserve, and the whale continues downward into the cold and the pressure and the dark, as naturally as a stone settles toward a riverbed, not because it has decided to, not because it is trying, but because it is shaped for exactly this, and the deep water is simply where it goes. 40 million years of ocean. That is the depth of time behind this body, and it is longer than most geological formations, and older than many mountain ranges, and longer by far than anything that could be called human history. Somewhere in that span, the ancestors of this animal left the land and entered the shallow water, and then the deeper water, and then the open ocean, and the ocean changed them. The ones that could hold more oxygen lived longer in the deep. The ones whose hearts slowed correctly survived the pressure. The ones whose rib cages could fold without fracturing came back from depths that killed the others. None of this happened with intention. None of the whales were trying to become what sperm whales are now. They were simply alive, and the ones whose bodies matched what the deep ocean required left more descendants, and across millions of generations, the match between the body and the deep became tighter and more precise. What exists now is the product of that match, not a design, but a consequence, not a plan, but a result. The result weighs more than 50 tons. It breathes air. It is warm-blooded in water that is near freezing. It carries a brain among the largest ever produced by evolution, inside a head filled with pale wax, in a body packed with dark muscle and dense blood, and a rib cage that yields to pressure like a slow, patient hinge. It descends 1 mile into the dark on a breath of air and returns. It has been doing this, or something close to this, for long enough that the ocean floor has changed shape several times while the lineage continued. The slow slanting blow at the surface, the flat face against the gray sky, the rolling back, the small dorsal hump, the broad flukes beginning to lift, and then the flukes clearing the water, angling upward against the sky for a moment, dark and wide, notched at the center, water streaming from the trailing edges, and then gone. The animal descending, the surface closing over the place where it was, and settling back to ordinary water, ordinary light, the wind moving across it as if nothing of consequence had passed through. Below that surface, moving downward at the pace of a slow elevator, the body is already changing. The heart is slowing. The rib cage is beginning its long inward fold. The blood is drawing toward the center. The spermaceti wax at the front of the enormous head is cooling, degree by degree, as the water temperature falls with increasing depth. And deep inside the chest, in the near dark of the body's interior, the heart beats its patient rhythm 4 times in a minute, in the cold and the quiet, carrying everything the animal needs to survive this, and nothing more. 4 beats, a long pause, 4 beats again. The depth continues to accumulate below, and the animal continues to descend into it, and the heart holds its slow and careful count in the dark. At the very front of the whale's head, set back behind the rounded tip of the lower jaw, 2 small lips of tissue press against each other in the dark. They are barely the size of a human hand. Around them, the rest of the animal stretches back for 50 feet or more, the great squared block of the head, the long tapered body, the wide flukes hanging still in the water below. But here, at this one small place, something is about to happen. The lips part slightly, and air from the left nasal passage rushes through the gap at pressure, and for a fraction of a second too brief to perceive, the world around the whale changes. A pulse of sound leaves that small opening, not a gentle sound, not a soft vibration in the water. What departs those 2 small lips is among the most powerful biological sounds produced anywhere on Earth, a sharp percussive burst of acoustic energy, concentrated and directional, traveling rearward from the phonic lips into the long interior of the whale's head, before it is shaped and turned and sent outward into the ocean ahead. The click lasts less than a millisecond. In the water, which carries sound well, it travels fast. These 2 small structures are called the phonic lips. Some researchers have also called them the museau du singe, a French phrase meaning the monkey's muzzle, a name given for the faint resemblance of their shape to a primate face, though nothing about the sound they make is small or soft or primate-like. They sit at the anterior end of the left nasal passage only, not the right. The right passage leads to the blowhole and handles breathing. The left passage handles this, the generation of acoustic pulses, so powerful that their source levels reach in the largest animals up to 230 decibels relative to 1 micropascal measured underwater. That number means very little to an ear built for air. In practical terms, it means the click is louder than almost any other sound made by any living thing. But loudness by itself is not the point. The point is what happens to the sound after it leaves the phonic lips. The click does not simply radiate outward in all directions. It enters a system, an architecture inside the whale's head that shapes it, directs it, organizes it into something the open ocean can carry and the whale can use. From the phonic lips, the pulse travels rearward along the left nasal passage. The passage runs the length of the spermaceti organ, that long reservoir of pale waxy oil that fills the front third of the head, and the sound moves through this material, which is not simply fat, but a specialized acoustic medium, denser and differently resonant than the surrounding tissue. At the far end of the nasal passage, the sound meets a large air-filled space, the frontal sac. Air reflects sound very well. The frontal sac acts as a mirror. The pulse that arrived traveling rearward is redirected, bounced back toward the front of the head, now traveling forward through the spermaceti organ again. The oil carries it. The oil shapes it slightly as it passes through. The acoustic properties of the wax interacting with the pulse in ways that depend on the wax's current temperature and density. And then the pulse reaches the front of the head, where the most complex part of the journey waits. The structure at the very front of the sperm whale's head, the rounded, bulging tip, visible when the animal is seen in profile, is not the spermaceti organ. It is something different. It is called the junk. The name carries none of the weight the structure deserves. The junk is a layered architecture of fatty tissue and dense connective material built in horizontal sections separated by thin walls, each layer with a slightly different acoustic density than the one above and below it. Seen in cross-section, it resembles nothing so much as a stack of pages in a book, each one distinct, each one continuous with the whole. It is not a single mass of fat. It is an organized structure with a geometry that has been refined across millions of years of evolutionary time, and its function is acoustic. The junk takes the pulse arriving from the spermaceti organ, already redirected and partially shaped, and bends it further, layer by layer, the way a curved glass lens bends light. Each layer refracts the pulse slightly. Across the full thickness of the junk, those small refractions accumulate into something useful, a focused, coherent, forward-directed beam of sound, narrowed and organized, aimed into the water ahead of the whale. The comparison to a lens is not decorative. The junk works on the same optical principle. The difference in density between adjacent materials causes a wave to change direction at each boundary, and if those boundaries are curved or arranged correctly, the cumulative effect is convergence. The junk is the most anatomically complex acoustic structure found in any cetacean. The melon of a dolphin does something similar, but simpler. The junk achieves greater directional control over the beam through a more elaborate internal geometry. Because a hunting sperm whale in open water at depth needs a narrower and more precisely aimed pulse than a dolphin navigating a reef, the beam leaves the front of the head and moves out into the ocean column, directional and concentrated, carrying the energy of that original brief burst of air through the phonic lips, now organized into something the water can carry for hundreds of meters before it loses coherence. The click travels at roughly 1,500 meters per second. This is not the speed of sound in air. It is the speed of sound in water, which is much faster. 1,500 meters per second means the click covers the length of a football field in under a quarter of a second. It covers a mile in just over a second. At the depths a hunting sperm whale reaches, where the water is cold and under great pressure, the speed varies somewhat, but not much. The click moves outward through the dark water at that pace, fast beyond any visual comparison. fast enough that distance and time collapse into each other, and the whale can locate a target not by sight, but by the gap between departure and return. Because the click travels at a known speed, and because the whale's nervous system can measure the interval between the moment of emission and the moment the echo arrives, the time delay encodes the distance. A target 150 meters away, roughly the length of a large ship, produces an echo that returns after about a fifth of a second. A target 300 meters away takes twice as long. The whale reads the delay the way something else might read a shadow's length to estimate the height of what cast it. The information is there, encoded in the simplest possible terms: how much time passed. From time, distance, from distance, location, from location, direction. The whale builds a picture of what is ahead of it in the water, not from light, there is no light down here, but from the returning shape of its own voice. The returning echo arrives not at the front of the head, but at the jaw. The lower jaw of a sperm whale is long and narrow, and filled along its inner surface with a channel of fat, dense, acoustically transparent tissue that runs from the tip of the jaw back toward the inner ear. Incoming vibrations in the water press against the outside of the jaw, pass through the thin bone, enter the fat channel, and travel inward along it to the cochlea. The pathway is efficient. It bypasses the outer ear. There is no outer ear in the conventional sense, no shell of cartilage to funnel sound from the world, and conducts the echo directly from water to nerve, through bone and fat, in a channel whose geometry matches the acoustic properties of the signal it is meant to receive. The jaw is a receiver, tuned by its structure to the frequencies the phonic lips produce. Those frequencies span a broad range. The click is a broadband pulse. It carries energy across many frequencies at once, not a single pure tone. The dominant energy sits roughly between 10 and 15 kilohertz, in the range often described as ultrasonic relative to human hearing, though the pulse also carries significant energy both below and above that range. Broadband pulses carry more information than narrowband ones. A single frequency tone tells a listener how far away a thing is and roughly how large. A broadband pulse tells more. The different frequencies in the pulse interact differently with the target's surfaces and its interior, and the echo that returns carries those differences within it. A spectrum of information about what was struck, not just a simple reflection. This is where something deeper happens. A click that passes through an object rather than simply reflecting off its surface emerges from the far side as what researchers call an acoustic shadow. The shadow is not nothing. It is a version of the click altered by its passage through the target's internal structures, its density, its fluid content, the presence or absence of harder or softer materials inside it. When two echoes from the same target arrive at the whale's jaw, one from the near surface, a simple reflection, and one is a transmitted shadow through the target's body, they carry different frequency content. Together, they describe not just the target's location and approximate size, but something of its internal character. What is it made of? How dense? Whether the interior is uniform or layered? Whether there is a hard beak at the center of a soft body? This is acoustic shadowing, and it is the deepest form of information available to a whale hunting in total darkness. No light is needed. No contact is required. The whale reads the interior of a distant object through the texture of the echo it returns, and that texture carries enough detail, apparently, to tell one species of squid from another at distances of many tens of meters in water where nothing can be seen at all. The nature of this capacity is not fully understood. Whether sperm whales can reliably distinguish between prey types using acoustic shadowing alone, or whether they use multiple cues together remains an open question. What can be said is that the anatomy is capable of it. The source level is high enough, the bandwidth is sufficient, the jaw pathway is efficient, and the neural processing of returning echoes is well developed. The full picture of what a hunting whale actually perceives, what the acoustic image looks like from inside the animal's experience, if that word means anything here, is something that still resists complete understanding. The clicks go out, the echoes come back. What the whale does with them, in detail, is still partly in shadow. Consider for a moment the sheer spatial scale of this process unfolding in total darkness. The whale hangs in the water column at several hundred meters, or perhaps more than 1,000. The water around it is black. The pressure is enormous. The temperature is cold, near 4 degrees Celsius, and every direction looks the same because no direction looks like anything. In this environment, the whale generates a sound and listens for its return. The sound travels outward, 200 meters, 300, perhaps farther in calm water, and if there is something there, something with a different density than the surrounding water, something with a body that reflects and refracts, the echo comes back. It arrives at the jaw as a faint signal, diminished by distance, altered by the target, carrying in its altered frequencies a description of what was out there in the dark. The whale reads that description, and then it clicks again. The pace of clicking during a normal deep dive is slow and methodical, 1 click per second, roughly, or perhaps 2, each click sent forward, each echo received and processed, before the next click departs. This rate is slow enough that the whale is not overwhelmed by overlapping echoes. The previous echo has returned and been processed before the next pulse is sent. The interval between clicks is not random. It scales with the distance to the target, or to the bottom, or to the edge of the acoustic range the whale is currently working with. As the target gets closer, the interval shrinks. As the target gets farther, or as the whale descends through a deep and empty water column, the interval can lengthen slightly, giving distant echoes time to return before the next pulse muddies the water with sound. This pacing, patient, measured, 1 pulse at a time, continues for minutes on a foraging dive. The whale descends and scans and listens, descends and scans and listens, building a picture of the water ahead from 10 minutes of clicks, the way a slow and methodical photographer builds an image from 10 minutes of exposure. Nothing is rushed. The ocean is very large, and the whale is very patient, and the system works best when there is time between pulses for the echoes to arrive cleanly and be read before the next one goes out. Deep water is acoustically complex. There are layers of different temperature and salinity that bend sound in curved paths. There are biological scatterers in the water column, small organisms whose bodies reflect clicks just as squid do, and at depth the ambient noise level is lower, quieter, more useful for listening. The whale's environment rewards patience. The clicks go out slowly, 1 at a time, into the dark. The sound that returns from an empty water column is not nothing. Even the water itself scatters a small fraction of the click back toward the whale. Thermal microstructure, small particles, density fluctuations that are never entirely absent. At depth, the return from a uniform water column is a kind of baseline, a faint, flat, textureless echo that tells the whale it is looking into empty water. When a body of different density is present, a squid, a fish, a drift of small organisms, the echo changes. It brightens slightly in certain frequencies. It carries structure. The change from baseline is what the whale listens for. The difference between the sound of empty water and the sound of something in it. Not all clicks serve the same purpose. The evenly spaced pulses sent out during a deep foraging dive are one kind of click. There are others. Sperm whales also produce patterns of clicks arranged in precise rhythmic sequences, short bursts with consistent intervals between them, repeated in characteristic patterns that differ between individuals and between groups. These are called codas. Codas are not aimed at the water ahead. They are not sent into the darkness to listen for echoes. They are exchanged between animals, between members of a family group at the surface, or between whales that are near each other in the water column, and their function appears to be social rather than navigational. Each group has its own coda repertoire. Individuals within a group have coda patterns that partly overlap with those of other group members and partly mark them as distinct. The same sound producing anatomy that shapes an echolocation pulse shapes a coda, but the purpose is entirely different. One sound reaches outward into the ocean to find the world. The other reaches between animals to maintain something between them. Both depart from the same small tissue at the front of the left nasal passage. The distinction matters because it means the phonic lips are not a single function organ. They are more like a larynx, a flexible source of acoustic energy that the whale can shape and aim and vary in rate and pattern depending on what it needs the sound to do. During a deep hunt, the clicks are evenly spaced, broadband forward directed. They are sensory tools. During social contact, the clicks are patterned, rhythmic, multidirectional. They are communicative. Between dives, at the surface, a whale may produce both kinds, or neither, simply breathing through the blowhole in the quiet above the water. There is a third kind of click, and it happens at a specific moment. The moment of final approach to a target, when the echo has returned clearly enough, and the target is close enough that the whale has committed to a capture attempt. At this moment, the click rate changes. The evenly spaced 1 per second pulses that have scanned the water column for the previous 30 or 40 minutes suddenly accelerate. The interval between clicks collapses. Clicks come faster, then faster still, until they are arriving and being sent at a rate of hundreds per second. At this rate, the individual pulses blur together into what sounds to a microphone placed nearby like a continuous buzz, a rapid, high-frequency tremor of sound energy directed at close range onto a target the whale has located and is now closing on. Researchers call this the terminal buzz, or sometimes the creak. Both names describe the quality of the sound. Creak describes how it sounds in a recording, like a hinge, like something tightening. Buzz describes the sensation of that compressed click rate, all those pulses overlapping and stacking. The function is spatial resolution. At long range, a slow click rate gives adequate information about distance and rough position. At short range, as the gap between predator and target closes rapidly, more information is needed more quickly. The target is moving. The whale is moving. Small errors in position estimate matter more now than they did at distance. The terminal buzz provides fine temporal resolution of the target's movements in the last seconds before contact. It is a solution found entirely independently in bats hunting moths in the dark and dolphins chasing fish in turbid water. Different animals, different bodies, different environments. The same solution. When the target is close, compress the clicks, send more of them, read the fine detail of what is happening in front of you. The terminal buzz lasts less than 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, the whale has either captured the target or has not. The buzz ends. The click rate drops back to its patient 1 per second cadence, or falls silent entirely, or the whale orients and begins again. The whole event, the approach, The acceleration, the buzz, the resolution, is brief in duration relative to the hours of diving and scanning that preceded it, the way the instant of a photograph is brief relative to the time spent traveling to stand in the right place for the light. The acoustic beam that the junk produces is not infinitely narrow. It spreads slightly as it travels. A beam that leaves the front of the whale's head as a focused cone becomes a somewhat wider cone at a distance of 100 meters and wider still at 200. This spreading is a limitation. It means the spatial resolution of the click degrades with distance, but it is also partly an advantage because a slightly spread beam scans a larger volume of water with each pulse than a perfectly collimated beam would. The whale sweeps its head slowly from side to side during a foraging descent, and with each sweep, the broadened beam covers an arc of water ahead, building a picture of the column it is moving through in 3 dimensions. The head movements are subtle and unhurried. The beam moves with them, sweeping slowly, and the returning echoes build a spatial map of what is ahead and below and to either side. In absolute darkness, 1 mile below the surface, this is what perception looks like. Not seeing, in any sense familiar to a creature built for light. Not hearing, in any ordinary sense, not the passive reception of sounds that arrive from the world. Something else, a form of reach. The whale extends its perception ahead of itself by sending part of itself out, a pulse of organized sound that travels into the darkness, strikes something, and comes back changed. The change is the information. The whale generates the medium of its own perception and reads what the world does to it. The echo is not just a signal, it is a description written by the target on the texture of the returning sound. That description is never complete. There is always noise. There is always ambiguity. Echoes arrive from multiple objects at once, from the bottom, from the scattering layer, from the individual bodies of squid and fish and small crustaceans spread through the water column in millions. The whale's nervous system must sort these simultaneous returns, assign them to their sources, estimate the geometry of what is out there in the dark. How exactly this processing works in the sperm whale's brain, how the neural architecture parses overlapping echoes from a complex acoustic environment, is not fully understood. The measurements that exist are of the sounds themselves, recorded by hydrophones placed near hunting whales, and from those recordings the click rates and interclick intervals and buzz characteristics can be read. What happens in the whale's auditory cortex after the echo arrives at the jaw is harder to measure, and much of it is still unknown. What can be said is that the system works. Sperm whales eat. They eat enormous amounts. An adult male needs something close to a ton of food each day to sustain its size and the energetic cost of its deep dives. All of that food is found in total darkness, at pressures that would collapse an unsupported human lung, in water cold enough to damage tissue not built for it, at depths where no light from the surface has ever reached. The echolocation system is not a curiosity or an auxiliary sense. It is the entire basis of the whale's relationship with food. Every meal the animal has eaten in its life arrived first as a click, then as an echo, then as an acoustic image built in the dark water ahead, and only then, if the image was right, as the terminal buzz of a final approach and the brief mechanical contact of a capture. The click that begins this process, the one that departs the phonic lips as a sharp burst of compressed air, is followed almost immediately by another and another, spaced at intervals of roughly half a second to 1 second throughout the descent. Over the course of a 40-minute dive, the whale produces thousands of clicks, Most return from empty water. A few return from something that might be worth investigating more closely. Fewer still produce a terminal buzz, and of those, not all result in a capture. The ocean is large, and the targets are fast, and the information, however good, is never perfect. The system is good enough to have sustained these animals for millions of years in the deep ocean through the full range of conditions the ocean presents. That is the measure of how well it works. The geometry of the click's journey, from phonic lips to spermaceti organ, reflected off the frontal sac, forward through the junk, outward through the water, off a distant body in the dark, back to the jaw, inward through the fat channel to the inner ear, is one of the more intricate paths any biological signal takes. The entire outgoing leg is internal to the whale's head. The returning leg passes from open water into bone, into specialized fat, into nerve. The click is born inside the animal and returns to it altered by everything it met on the way out. The whale knows the world by what the world does to its voice. Nothing about this system is simple, though it begins with something very simple: two small lips of tissue pressing together, parting briefly, and pressing again at the pace of 1 second between each parting. The pause between one click and the next is the listening interval, the space in which the echo, if there is one, has time to arrive. In that pause, the whale is not blind. It is receiving. The dark water ahead of it is full of returning sound, faint and complex, and full of information, all of it arriving at the jaw in the space between one click and the next. In the deep water, in the cold and the pressure and the perfect absence of light. This is what it means to see, and the strangest thing about all of it, the thing that sits quietly at the center of everything the measurements reveal, is that the echo carries more information than the outgoing click was asked to carry. The click was a question. The echo is an answer, and it is longer than the question, richer than it, structured in ways the click was not, because the target has added itself to the signal on its way back. The density of the squid's mantle, the fluid inside the arms, the hard internal shell called the gladius, the arrangement of organs within the body, all of this leaves a trace in the returning frequencies. The whale did not send out a detailed question. It sent out a blunt pulse of broadband sound. The world wrote the detail onto the echo, and the whale reads it. Whether this reading produces anything like an image, something with shape and spatial extent and recognizable form, or whether it produces something entirely unlike what vision produces, something for which no human analogy exists, is a question that has no certain answer. The brain of a sperm whale is the largest brain of any animal on Earth by mass. It is elaborately folded. The auditory processing regions are extensive. What these regions construct from the returning echoes is not accessible to direct observation, and it may not be expressible in terms that make sense to a creature that evolved to see. The whale navigates and hunts and identifies its prey in complete darkness using sound alone, and does so with a precision that the results, the food consumed, the targets captured, make clear. The inner experience, if there is one, is inaccessible. The outer performance is not. A single click departs the phonic lips, travels back through the whale's head, bounces off the frontal sac, moves forward through the layers of the junk, leaves the whale entirely, crosses 300 meters of cold dark water, strikes something soft and dense and alive, and returns. The whole journey, out and back, takes less than half a second. In the time it takes a human heart to complete one beat, the whale has extended its perception 300 meters into the darkness, received a description of what is there, and begun processing the information. The heart beats slowly in the cold, the clicks go out, the echoes come back, each one carrying the texture of a distant target, written in the difference between what left and what returned, arriving at the jaw in the long silence of the deep ocean, where the only sound that has ever existed, for miles in every direction, is the whale's own voice and the world answering it. At 700 meters below the surface, in water just above freezing, a giant squid drifts without moving its arms. Its mantle, the smooth muscular tube of its body, is perhaps a meter and a half long, pale and semi-translucent in the darkness, faintly iridescent where the skin catches nothing because there is nothing to catch. Its tentacles trail outward and downward from the ring of shorter arms at its head, extending to a total reach of nearly 12 meters from tip to tip. The animal is weightless in the column. It makes no sound. The water around it is absolute black, unbroken, the kind of darkness that has no edges and no gradations and has been this dark since the ocean first filled. Nothing about the giant squid announces its size at first. It is a soft animal with no skeleton, no shell, no rigid frame. Its mass is distributed across those long tentacles and that pale cylindrical mantle, and in the open water of the deep ocean, there is no surface or floor to measure it against, no reference that would make its length legible. But the arms alone, the two longest, the tentacular clubs extend outward like trailing ribbons, each one ending in a paddle-shaped flap dense with sucker rings, and from the end of one tentacle to the end of the other is a span wider than a city bus is long. The animal has been here for hours. It has barely moved. It sees through eyes as large as dinner plates. Among all living animals, only the giant squid and its close relative, the colossal squid, are known to have eyes this size, each one wider than a human head, set on either side of the mantle, able to gather faint traces of bioluminescent light in water where no sunlight has ever penetrated. The pupils are enormous. The lens is clear and firm. At 700 meters, there is no light to see by, or almost none. But almost none is not the same as none, and the eyes are built for almost none. The giant squid went unphotographed in its natural habitat for the entire recorded history of marine science. Specimens arrived at the surface, dead or dying, washed ashore, pulled up in trawl nets, found in the stomachs of sperm whales. They were measured and cataloged, and their arms were spread on the floors of museum storerooms. But the living animal, in its actual place, was not photographed until researchers lowered a camera, baited with a smaller squid, into deep water off the Ogasawara Islands in the North Pacific, and waited. The photograph that came back, taken in 2004, deep in the water column, the squid approaching the bait with two long tentacles extended toward it, was the first direct image of a living giant squid in the ocean it actually lives in. The total length of that animal, estimated from the image, was about 8 meters. Larger specimens are thought to exist. The largest individuals of the species may reach 13 meters from the tip of the mantle to the end of the longest tentacle. The name of this species is Architeuthis dux. The name means, roughly, ruling squid. It lives across all ocean basins, distributed broadly through the world's deep water between roughly 300 and 1,000 meters. No one has ever observed it hunting. No one has ever observed it mating. What is known about its behavior comes almost entirely from inference, from the contents of sperm whale stomachs, from camera traps in the deep water, from the few brief images that exist of living individuals, and from the marks it leaves on the skin of the animals that hunt it. Below the giant squid, deeper and farther south, in the cold sub-Antarctic water, where the ocean drops past 1,000 meters into a region of sustained pressure and near freezing temperature, there is a second squid species that is larger still, not longer, but heavier, substantially heavier. The colossal squid, Mesonicoteuthis hamiltoni, is the largest invertebrate by mass on Earth. Confirmed specimens have weighed close to 500 kilograms. The mantle alone is thick and dense, full of the ammonia-laden fluid that gives many deep squid their characteristic buoyancy. The total length of a large colossal squid is shorter than a large giant squid, but its body is massively broader and heavier, built more like a barrel than a ribbon. A 500-kilogram colossal squid weighs roughly as much as a small horse. Its arms are not like the giant squid's arms. Where the giant squid carries suckers edged with serrated chitin, hard ring-shaped structures that grip by suction and cut slightly when pressed, the colossal squid carries hooks. On the middle section of each arm and on the tentacular clubs, the suckers are replaced or supplemented by rotating hooks, small curved blades mounted on swiveling bases, each one independently mobile, each one able to pivot to grip from any direction. They function like grappling hardware rather than suction cups. When a colossal squid closes its arms around something, the hooks swing inward and lock. The grip does not rely on a vacuum seal. It relies on penetration. The squid is a predator as much as it is prey. It hunts Patagonian toothfish and other large fish at depth, and its hooks leave marks on whatever it holds. The colossal squid was known from fragmentary remains, beaks recovered from sperm whale stomachs, arm sections found in trawl nets, long before any intact specimen was ever recovered. The beak is the one part of a squid that does not digest easily. Whale stomachs accumulate them in quantity, and scientists sorting through stomach contents have cataloged thousands of squid beaks, identifying species and estimating sizes from beak dimensions. The largest colossal squid beaks in the fossil record of whale stomachs suggest animals even larger than any specimen ever directly recovered. A beak scales with the size of the animal it came from. Some of the beaks are very large. At depth, in the cold and the dark, among the communities of organisms that have adapted over long time to live below the reach of sunlight, bioluminescence is the closest thing to a common language. It is not rare in the deep ocean. It is, in various estimates, one of the most widespread traits among marine animals at mesopelagic depths, present in fish, jellyfish, crustaceans, worms, and squid. Many deep-water squid species carry photophores, small light-producing organs embedded in the skin of their mantle, along their arms, sometimes across their ventral surface, in patterns that differ between species. The light produced is cold. It requires no heat to generate. A photophore produces light through a chemical reaction controlled by the animal that can be switched on and off in fractions of a second. In some species, the photophores serve for camouflage, producing a faint downwelling glow from the ventral surface that matches the dim light filtering from above, erasing the animal's silhouette when viewed from below. In other species, the light may serve in communication, signaling between individuals of the same species in water too dark for other signals to reach. And in some squid, when a predator closes in, the photophores fire all at once. The whole mantle lights briefly. A cloud of luminescent mucus may release from the skin, a burst of cold blue-green light blooming outward in the water around the animal, diffuse and bright, lasting perhaps a second before it fades and disperses. The squid is gone by then, or trying to be. What exactly this flash accomplishes is not settled. It may startle a predator long enough for the squid to flee. It may serve as a decoy, a bright presence in the water where the animal no longer is. It may do something else entirely, or nothing in some encounters, but in the permanent darkness of the deep ocean, any light is an event. A flash that lasts a single second in water that has been lightless for 10,000 years of geological time is still a flash. It still carries information, whether the predator that triggers it is a sperm whale closing in at 200 meters per minute, or something smaller and slower. The light enters the darkness and leaves a trace in whatever receptors are present to receive it, and then the darkness closes again. The jet propulsion system that drives a squid in flight is among the fastest locomotion mechanisms produced by any invertebrate in water. The mantle of a squid is a muscular tube, and when the muscles of that tube contract simultaneously and forcefully, they compress the internal cavity and expel a column of water through the narrow siphon at high velocity. The squid accelerates forward or backward, depending on siphon orientation, in a burst that carries it several body lengths in a second. Estimates of peak escape speed in large squid reach up to roughly 40 kilometers per hour in short sprints. The burst lasts only as long as the single contraction, a fraction of a second of peak acceleration, and then the mantle must refill and contract again for the next pulse. In open water with no shelter against a predator the size of a sperm whale, jet propulsion is not a reliable escape mechanism at range. A whale moving at a sustained swimming speed can follow a squid over distance without the metabolic cost of repeated burst acceleration. The squid's advantage is short range. The burst, the flash, the ink cloud, the rapid change of direction enabled by siphon redirection. In the darkness at close range, with a whale that has been tracking the squid by echolocation from 50 meters out, the gap between the squid's burst speed and the whale's closing speed may not be large enough to matter. The squid jets, the darkness closes around it. Whether it escapes depends on geometry and timing, and a margin that may be very narrow. The evidence that these encounters occur at depth and at significant scale is written not in any observer's record, but in the skin of the whales themselves. Sperm whale skin carries scars, not the long rake marks left by shark teeth or the pressure injuries of a hard collision, but circular impressions, rings pressed into the skin, pale and persistent, left by the sucker rings of large squid. A sucker ring from a large squid is a rigid chitinous structure, serrated on the inner edge, and when it is pressed against a surface under the force of a clenching arm, it leaves a clean circular impression. On the skin of a living sperm whale, these impressions heal but do not fully disappear. They persist as discolored rings, visible for years, sometimes for the apparent lifetime of the animal. The diameter of the ring reveals something about the size of the squid that left it. Sucker ring size scales with arm diameter, which scales with total body size. A ring the width of a human palm came from an arm that was correspondingly thick, which came from a squid that was correspondingly large. Researchers examining the scar clusters on sperm whale skin have measured rings that suggest squid larger than any specimen ever directly recovered. The scars are not measurement instruments. The relationship between ring size and total body length involves assumptions and approximations. An individual variation within a species adds uncertainty, but a ring wider than a human palm is not a small sucker ring. It came from something. The clusters of scars around the head and rostrum of large male sperm whales are denser than the clusters on females or younger males. Large males dive deeper and encounter larger prey at depth. Some researchers have suggested that the largest squid, the oldest, heaviest individuals of both the giant and colossal squid species, are found at the deepest depths of the sperm whale's foraging range, below 1,000 meters, and that it is primarily the largest male whales who reach those depths and encounter those animals. The scars on those males carry the record of encounters that no camera has filmed and no researcher has witnessed. The record is there, in the skin, healed over and faded, the ghost of a grip pressed hard enough to mark flesh that has since continued living for decades. A squid's beak is the hardest structure in its body. It is made of chitin, the same material that forms the exoskeletons of insects and crustaceans, dense and dark and resistant to the enzymes that break down soft tissue. In a sperm whale's stomach, the soft parts of a squid, the mantle, the arms, the skin, digest within hours. The beak remains. It may remain intact for days or weeks before eventually passing through or being regurgitated. Whale researchers who have had access to fresh sperm whale stomach contents from animals stranded dead on beaches or in the era when whaling provided access to whale anatomy have counted the beaks accumulated there in large numbers. A single stomach sometimes contains dozens of beaks, representing dozens of squid consumed over multiple dives, the soft tissue long gone, and the hard beaks accumulating at the bottom of the stomach like a slow sediment. The beaks are sorted and measured and cross-referenced against beak-size databases for known species. Giant squid beaks are identifiable. Colossal squid beaks are identifiable. Smaller squid species and sperm whales eat many species. Not only the giants are identifiable when the reference database is complete enough. The resulting inventory of what a sperm whale eats over the course of weeks or months is indirect and incomplete, but it is the most detailed evidence available for what actually passes between predator and prey, 1,000 meters below the ocean's surface, in the cold and the dark, where no one has ever watched. A colossal squid beak, taken from a sperm whale's stomach in the Southern Ocean, was larger than any beak associated with a directly measured specimen. The animal it came from was estimated to have been very large, possibly larger than 500 kilograms. The estimate is uncertain. The beak is real. It sits in a museum collection somewhere, small and dark and hard, and it came out of the stomach of a whale, and the whale that swallowed it had to catch it first, a mile below the surface, in water that has been cold and dark since before the current configuration of the southern continents was fully formed. Deep-sea squid that live below the range of sunlight exist in conditions that no instrument on the surface can reach without deliberate engineering. The pressure at 1,000 meters is roughly 100 times the pressure at the surface, enough to crush an unprotected human body in seconds, enough to compress gas spaces entirely, enough to alter the chemistry of proteins and membranes in ways that would disable the physiology of any surface animal. Deep-sea squid have evolved over a long time to work within this pressure, not around it. Their proteins are stabilized by molecular adaptations that keep them flexible and functional at high pressure. Their cell membranes are tuned to remain fluid rather than rigid at low temperatures. Their buoyancy is maintained not by a gas-filled swim bladder, gas compresses too much at depth to be reliable, but by the retention of ammonia-containing fluid in the tissues, denser than air but lighter than seawater, providing neutral buoyancy without a gas space that would collapse. The ammonia is why deep-sea squid, including giant squid, taste strongly of ammonia when eaten by humans. The same fluid that keeps the animal neutrally buoyant at depth is present in the flesh throughout, and it renders the tissue unpalatable to most human tastes, though this has not prevented people from eating squid in cultures where it is prepared with care. Sperm whales do not appear to find the ammonia objectionable, The fluid in the flesh may even make a giant squid slightly less energetically dense than a squid of comparable mass without the ammonia, but the whale consumes enough volume to meet its needs regardless. The energetics of what a sperm whale eats are not fully settled, but the whale is eating squid in very large numbers every day, regardless of species, and the beaks accumulate in the stomach to prove it. At the depth where squid live, light from the surface is entirely absent. There is no blue, no green, no faint gradient fading toward darkness. The darkness is complete and has been complete for all of the time these animals have been alive, and for all of the evolutionary time that shaped them. The bioluminescent light that some of them carry is the only light that exists in this part of the ocean, cold, brief, biological, produced and consumed within the same dark space. A photophore firing on the mantle of a squid does not illuminate the water around it the way a lamp illuminates a room. It produces a small specific light in a specific place, lasting a fraction of a second or a few seconds, and then it is gone. The ocean does not change. The darkness continues as it was. In this darkness, the animals navigate, hunt, flee, find one another, and live out their full lives. The giant squid grows slowly, reaching its full length over years. The rate is not precisely known, because no one has raised a giant squid from juvenile to adult in captivity, and the age of wild animals cannot be read directly. Growth rings in the statoliths, the small calcium carbonate balance organs inside a squid's head, may record growth in the way tree rings record years, but interpreting them requires assumptions that are not universally agreed on. What is clear is that giant squid reach large sizes, and that large sizes at depth require long survival, and that surviving at depth for years in the same water where sperm whales hunt regularly is its own achievement. The squid that bears the scar of a failed whale attack that escaped the terminal buzz of a closing echolocation sequence, that jetted away in the darkness fast enough or far enough that the whale missed, that carried its pale sucker rings back into the cold column and resumed drifting, carries no record of the encounter in the way a whale's skin carries scars. Squid skin does not preserve old impressions the way whale skin does. The squid may be injured. It may be missing an arm tip where a whale's teeth closed on it, but it will not carry for decades the rounded ghost of a grip that did not hold. It will drift again in the darkness, arms extended, its plate-sized eyes gathering the absence of light, its photophores quiet, its siphon ready, its body whole enough to continue. The sperm whale that missed will continue downward for another 100 meters before turning, or it will rise and try again, or it will move to another part of the water column where the echolocation shows something else. The encounter, if it happened, lasted perhaps a few seconds at its most intense, the terminal buzz firing, the gap closing, the squid jetting, and then the whale was alone in the dark water again, clicking at 1 pulse per second into the empty column ahead. The record of the miss is nowhere. Only the hits leave marks, and only the marks that last long enough are found. On the flank of an old male sperm whale, somewhere in the Pacific or the Atlantic, a cluster of circular scars sits in the skin. They are pale against the darker hide. They are faded, which means they are old. The largest among them is wider than a human hand spread open, the sucker ring that left it pressing hard enough to mark the blubber beneath the skin before the arm lost its grip or the whale turned away. The squid that left that scar is almost certainly dead now. Its lifespan, whatever it was, has most likely run, but the scar on the whale may persist for another decade or two, fading slowly, a circle in the skin that was once a moment of grip and resistance in water a mile deep. The whale does not know the scar is there. It cannot see its own flank. It carries the mark the way old wood carries the marks of old weather, not as memory, not as information, but as material consequence pressed into the structure of the body and held there by the body's ongoing life. The whale breathes at the surface and dives and clicks into the dark, and the scar is there on its flank, fading across years in water that has nothing to say about what made it or when. Everything in the deep ocean that leaves a mark leaves it this way, in bodies, in sediment, in accumulated beaks, in the chemical record of tissues. The water itself holds nothing. It moves, it is replaced. The cold current that was at 700 meters yesterday is somewhere else today, and the water that fills the space has been traveling from the surface for a very long time, sinking as it cooled in the polar regions and flowing southward or northward along the bottom, arriving at depth slowly and without announcement. The water is not the same water the squid drifted in last week, but the squid is still there, drifting in whatever water the column now contains, its arms extended, its eyes open and empty in the dark. This is the life of the deep. Not violent, not constant, not dramatic in the sense of continuous action. It is long periods of drifting and waiting, punctuated by brief, intense events. The flash of bioluminescence, the pulse of the siphon, the grip and release of an encounter in total darkness. The largest invertebrate on Earth spends most of its time motionless in cold black water, neutrally buoyant, arms trailing, eyes open, breathing through gills that absorb oxygen from water that moves across them by the slow circulation of the animal's blood. It is doing almost nothing for most of its life, and doing almost nothing at depth is a complete and sufficient way of being alive. The marks it leaves on the whale are its most legible trace. They persist after the squid itself is gone, after the encounter it records has receded into undifferentiated past, after the water in which it happened has circulated away and been replaced many times. A circle in the skin of a living whale, widening imperceptibly year by year as the whale grows and the scar stretches slightly with the expanding hide, is the lasting signature of an animal that lived its whole life in permanent night, that was large and strange and built for pressure. No surface creature could survive, that gripped hard enough once to leave this mark, and then was gone into the dark water, and then, eventually, was gone entirely. And the scar remains, pale and circular, fading slowly across decades in the skin of an animal that is still alive and still diving, still descending past 1,000 meters with its heart slowing to a few beats per minute, still clicking into the darkness ahead, still hunting in the cold and the black at the bottom of its long breath, carrying on its flank, without knowing it, the quiet permanent record of what it once encountered and what once encountered it, written in flesh, held there by the ongoing fact of a body still alive in the world. The flukes rise last. They clear the surface in a slow arc, broad, dark, edged with salt water running back in thin streams, and then they are gone. The ocean closes over the place where they were. A ring of disturbed water spreads outward and smooths. The surface becomes, in a few seconds, indistinguishable from every other part of the sea around it, as though the animal beneath had never been here at all. Below the surface, in the first seconds of the dive, the whale is still in the lit world. Sunlight filters down through the upper water, diffusing as it descends, losing its warmth, losing its color, losing its reach. The whale does not pause in this zone. The body angles downward and holds that angle, the tail driving in long, unhurried strokes, and the descent begins in earnest, not a drop, Not a fall, but something more deliberate than either, more certain, the way a stone set carefully at the edge of a slope begins to move. At 150 meters per minute, the lit water goes dark above, the zone of permanent twilight, where the last blue-gray suggestions of surface light arrive too weak to be of use, passes in under 2 minutes. At roughly 300 feet, the light is gone entirely. No sunrise reaches here. No wave shadow passes overhead. The water column below the whale is lightless in all directions and has been for as long as there has been a deep ocean, which is to say, for a very long time indeed. The clicks begin. They arrive in the water as evenly spaced pulses, one, then a pause, then another, the interval between them almost exactly a second. Each pulse travels outward into the column ahead of the descending whale, fanning forward in a narrow beam, reaching into water the whale cannot see and will never see, and returning seconds later with the shape of what it found there, or with the shape of nothing. At this depth, in the early part of the descent, the water column is largely empty, cold, dark, with the pressure mounting steadily around the whale's body, the chest wall compressing inward, the heart already beginning to slow. The clicks continue, one per second, patient, methodical. At 400 meters, the pressure is 40 times what it is at the surface. A human lung, unprotected, would be crushed to a fraction of its resting size at this depth. The whale's ribcage hinges inward at its cartilaginous joints, accommodating the pressure without resistance, the chest folding gently the way a paper bag folds when you press on it from both sides at once, without breaking, without rupturing, simply giving. The oxygen that was loaded into the blood at the surface and into the muscle tissue itself circulates quietly. The heart beats at somewhere around 10 times per minute now. It will slow further. The clicks continue. The whale descends. 600 meters, 700. The water temperature has dropped to just a few degrees above freezing. The darkness here is total and also ancient. This water may not have touched the surface for decades or longer, moving in the slow, deep currents that circulate the ocean's interior over centuries. The whale moves through it without disturbing it much. A wake of displaced water, a trail of warmth in the cold, a train of clicks traveling outward and returning. These are all the whale leaves as it passes through. At 800 meters, the clicking pattern is still slow and regular. This is the searching rhythm, a broad acoustic sweep of the water ahead, patient and unhurried, built for covering distance rather than resolving detail. Each pulse travels roughly 300 feet in a fifth of a second, strikes the far end of its useful range, and returns. The whale reads the returning sound through the lower jaw, through the fatty channel that conducts vibration directly to the inner ear, and the information accumulates, the shape of the column below, the presence or absence of anything solid in it, the slow emergence of the deep scattering layer as the whale descends into it from above. The deep scattering layer is not a floor. It does not have sharp edges. It is more like a weather system, a broad distributed band of living things drifting in the middle depths of the ocean, thick enough in places to reflect sound back to the surface, thin enough in others to pass through. It rises each evening as the light fades above, and descends again at dawn when the first gray light returns to the surface water. The organisms that make it, small squid, fish no larger than a hand, shrimp, lanternfish with rows of bioluminescent organs along their flanks, travel this vertical distance every single day. In the evening hours, a whale descending toward 1,000 meters drops into the scattering layer from above, and what had been empty water below suddenly fills with echoes. Not all of these echoes are useful. Many are too small. Many carry the wrong acoustic texture, the wrong density, the wrong internal shadow. A hunting whale is not looking for anything that reflects sound. It is looking for something specific within everything that reflects sound, and the discrimination happens in the echo's texture, in the quality of what returns, rather than simply the fact that something returned at all. The clicks continue, one per second, and then the whale finds something worth attending to. The interval between clicks does not shorten all at once. It shortens gradually over the course of several seconds, the way a person walking towards something interesting walks a little faster, almost without noticing. The spacing between pulses contracts. One per second becomes two per second, becomes three, becomes more, and the acoustic beam tightens on its target. The returning echoes arrive more frequently now, carrying updated information about the target's position, its distance, its movement through the water, whether it is fleeing or drifting, or simply hanging in the dark. At 100 feet away from the target, the clicking accelerates past anything that could be called a rhythm. The pulses compress into a continuous blur of sound, not separate clicks, but a rapid-fire sequence arriving so fast that the gaps between them disappear entirely. This is the terminal buzz. It lasts less than 2 seconds. It sounds nothing like the slow, patient clicks of the descent. It contains hundreds of individual pulses in those 2 seconds, each one updating the whale's knowledge of the target's exact location at a resolution fine enough to track a body the size of a large dog moving through black water at close range. And then the buzz ends. What happens in the dark after the buzz ends cannot be seen. The water column holds no record of it. The whale is not observed. The outcome arrives only later, in the food that shows up in a recovered stomach, or in the time between the last deep dive and the moment a new one begins, or in the slow arithmetic of a body that must eat roughly a ton of food each day, and that dove today and will dive again tomorrow. The terminal buzz is a convergent solution. Bats use it, working in air, hunting moths in the dark above meadows on summer nights. Dolphins use it, working in shallow coastal water, chasing fish through murky estuaries. The sperm whale uses it a mile below the surface of the open ocean, in water that has not seen light in decades, hunting animals large enough to leave scars. The physics of acoustic tracking required the same answer in each case: compress the pulses at close range, increase temporal resolution, close the gap between emission and target with as much information as the interval allows. The three lineages arrived at this solution separately, across millions of years, and from entirely different starting points, because the problem was the same, and the physics offered the same answer. The clicks slow again after the buzz. The whale moves through the water at depth, and the searching rhythm resumes, one per second, patient, reaching forward into the dark, and the dive continues. Sometimes the buzz resolves into nothing. The target moves in a direction the whale cannot follow in time, or the squid fires its jet propulsion in a burst of acceleration and vanishes into the dark before the closing distance can be closed, and the whale adjusts its heading, and the clicking continues as before. The energetic ledger does not announce itself. It is simply kept, silently, in the quiet mathematics of metabolic need and successful capture in the long rhythm of days at sea. There are days or portions of days when a whale does something different. The multi-sensor tags that researchers have attached to free-swimming sperm whales, devices that record depth, orientation, acceleration, and sound simultaneously, have sometimes returned data that shows a whale doing none of the above. No clicking, no tail strokes, no active descent or ascent. A whale at depth, 900 meters, 1,000, lying still, horizontal or close to it, neither producing sound nor swimming, drifting in the current like a large, warm, neutrally buoyant object suspended in cold, dark water. This is called passive drift foraging, and it is not well understood. The best current picture is this: in the deep ocean, where vision carries nothing and where sound carries everything, a large object that is warm and silent and motionless in the water may be genuinely novel to the animals around it. Squid in the mesopelagic zone navigate by acoustic information, by the presence and movement of other animals, by the patterns of vibration and displacement that tell them what is close. A large, quiet object that produces no clicks, makes no swimming sounds, and radiates faint warmth into the surrounding water may attract squid that approach it the way animals approach anything ambiguous in the dark, with curiosity or with confusion, or simply because the object does not register as a threat. The whale hangs still and waits. This stillness is not passive in the way that exhaustion is passive, or in the way that sleep is passive. The body is functioning, the heart is beating 4 times a minute, perhaps 5, in the cold at depth, doing the careful minimum needed to keep the brain supplied with what it requires. The oxygen reservoir in the muscle tissue is still giving what it carries. The blood, loaded at the surface with more hemoglobin than most mammals carry by proportion, is circulating through the organs that need it most. The peripheral circulation, the fins, the outer skin, the extremities, has withdrawn, drawn inward, so that what oxygen remains moves through the shortest circuits. The body knows how to do this. It has been doing this for millions of years. The instructions written into the physiology so deeply that no thought is required. The whale drifts. 1,000 meters of cold ocean presses against it from every direction. The pressure at this depth is roughly 100 atmospheres, 100 times the weight of the air column above the surface. Against a human body, this would be lethal within seconds. Against this body, it is simply the condition of the hunt, the medium the animal has always moved through, the weight of the world at this depth, which the body accommodates the way a hand accommodates the weight of a cup. The click train was regular earlier, before the stillness, 1 per second, reaching forward. During the foraging dives that researchers have tagged and recorded, the transition between active clicking and this total silence can happen within a few body lengths. The whale reduces its tail stroke rate, decelerates, and then simply stops. The water closes around the stillness. What was a source of regular acoustic pulses becomes, in the space of a few seconds, an absence, a large, quiet, drifting shape. How long the drift lasts varies. Some recorded drift episodes are short, a minute or 2, after which the clicking resumes and the whale begins active swimming again. Others are longer, sustained silences in the deep water that persist for several minutes before the tag records the resumption of sound and motion. Whether the squid that approach during these silences approach because they are attracted to warmth, or because the silence itself is unusual in a layer of water full of acoustic information, or because the whale's shape resembles something familiar, or for reasons that have nothing to do with any of these, is not known. What is known is that the whales do it. What is known is that the stomachs of recovered animals contain squid. The connection between the behavior and the meal is inferred, not observed directly, and the inference is a reasonable one. The ocean at depth has its own architecture. It is not uniform. The scattering layer is one structure within it, a living, breathing band of organisms that rise and fall with the light above. Below it, the bathypelagic zone holds other things: slower animals, colder water, less activity, and a pressure that increases steadily with every 10 meters of additional depth. The whale moves through these zones as a human might move through a building with many floors, entering and exiting different environments in the space of a single dive, reading each one as it passes through. At the deepest points of a recorded dive, and the deepest confirmed sperm whale dive sits at roughly 2,250 meters, reached by a single individual tracked by researchers off the coast of the Azores. The pressure would collapse a sealed metal drum. The whale was there for less than an hour in total, including descent and ascent, and what it found at that depth, or whether it found anything at all, the tag could record only in terms of depth and orientation, and the presence or absence of click trains. The interior of those 2,000 meters is beyond direct observation. What can be reconstructed is the acoustics of a typical foraging dive, and the picture it assembles is one of methodical patience. A whale covers a foraging area not by speed, but by acoustic reach, the click beam extending forward and to the sides, the returning echoes painting a picture of the water column ahead, with every passing second, the whale adjusting its heading based on what returns and moving in the direction that offers the most. Over the course of a single dive, a whale may scan several hundred meters of water column in multiple directions, all of it invisible, all of it rendered in the texture of returning sound. The clicking at 1 per second during the search phase has a specific quality. Each click is a broadband pulse, carrying energy across a wide range of frequencies, with the strongest energy concentrated in the range between roughly 10 and 15,000 cycles per second. At this frequency, the pulses travel efficiently through seawater, losing relatively little energy over distance. A pulse emitted at the foraging depth of a sperm whale can travel several hundred meters before its returning echo becomes too faint to read. This is the acoustic range of the hunt, not the entire ocean, but enough of it on each dive to locate what is there. The social clicks, the coda patterns, the rhythmic sequences that whales produce at the surface in the company of their family groups are acoustically distinct from the foraging clicks in ways that are immediately apparent to researchers listening on hydrophones. The coda is patterned, rhythmic, individuated, a kind of signature, or at least a recognizable contribution to a group-level exchange. The foraging click is a tool. It is not addressed to another whale. It is addressed to the dark water ahead, and it waits for the water to answer. During a foraging dive, these two acoustic modes do not appear together. The whale below the surface is in the other register, the register of solitude and attention and patient acoustic scanning. The social register waits for the surface. The energetic arithmetic of deep foraging is unforgiving in its simplicity. An adult male sperm whale, the largest of the species, the animals that make the deepest and longest dives, the individuals that travel alone to high-latitude feeding grounds far from the tropical and subtropical waters where females and young remain, requires something in the range of a ton of food each day to sustain itself. Not a ton of prey contacted, not a ton of prey detected, a ton of prey captured, swallowed, and digested. Every dive is a deduction from the energetic account. Every successful capture is a deposit. The account must balance over days and weeks, or the animal declines. A single large squid, a Architeuthis dux, of 12 or 13 meters total length, with a mantle mass of several hundred pounds, represents a significant deposit, but encounters with squid of that size are not frequent. Most prey taken during foraging dives are smaller, medium-sized squid, available in greater numbers but individually less valuable. The whale's strategy over the course of a dive, and over the course of a day, and over the course of a season is to take what is there, at depth in the dark, as efficiently as the body allows. The terminal buzz is the most energetically committed moment of any dive. The click rate at that point, hundreds of pulses per second, is the acoustic equivalent of a sprint. The information gathered in those 2 seconds is the most detailed acoustic picture the whale produces. After the buzz, whatever follows, the whale resumes its slower scan. The searching rhythm is restored, 1 per second. The dive continues until the oxygen budget demands the return. The return from depth is not rushed, but it is not leisurely either. The body monitors its own reserves, and the decision to ascend begins before the reserves are exhausted, not at the edge of the available oxygen, but before it, because the ascent itself costs energy, and the metabolism at depth has been running on the oxygen stored in the blood and muscle since the lungs collapsed at shallow depths and ceased to contribute. The whale turns upward, and the tail begins to drive again, the long strokes that covered the descent now working in reverse, adding speed to what would otherwise be a slow, passive rise. The scattering layer passes again during the ascent. Animals that were below the whale during the descent may now be above it. The clicking continues through the ascent phase, though at a different character than the foraging search. Less the slow, methodical scan of an animal moving through new territory, and more the intermittent pulse of an animal moving through familiar water toward a known destination. The surface, which the whale cannot see, and has not seen for between 45 minutes and an hour, is above and growing closer with each stroke. The pressure decreases with every meter of ascent. The rib cage begins to expand again as the water's weight reduces. The oxygen that was bound in the muscle tissue has largely been spent. The heart, which slowed to a few beats per minute at depth, begins to accelerate as the surface approaches, not yet the resting rate, but rising, the cardiovascular system reorienting itself toward the demands of surface breathing. Lactic acid, which accumulated in the muscle tissue during the periods of anaerobic metabolism at depth, waits in the tissues to be cleared. The surface breaks again over the whale's head. The blow rises forward and to the left, a characteristic angle, a characteristic lean, and the first breath in nearly an hour replaces most of the lung volume in a single exchange. Then another breath, and another, the rhythm of recovery beginning, and the animal floats and breathes and is, for now, entirely in the lit world again. But the dive is still running in the body. The acid in the muscles clears slowly. The oxygen debt is repaid incrementally, breath by breath, over the 12 or 15 minutes of the surface interval before the next dive begins. The flukes will rise again. The ring of disturbed water will spread and smooth. The whale below the water will angle downward, and the clicks will begin, 1 per second, reaching into the dark. This happens every day, every hour of the part of the day devoted to foraging. The dive, the scan, the closing approach, the terminal buzz, the outcome, and then the ascent, and the surface, and the slow replenishment, and the dive again. The ton of food required accumulates in increments of individual squid, each one taken in the dark, at depth, in silence, except for the brief blur of clicks that marks the final approach. The mesopelagic zone, where most of this hunting takes place, is the largest living space on Earth, measured by volume. More animal life in terms of sheer mass inhabits the middle depths of the ocean than any other environment on the planet. It is also among the least observed. The pressure prevents direct access by unprotected researchers. The darkness prevents the use of conventional cameras without introducing artificial light that alters the behavior of everything in range. The scale spanning every ocean, from roughly 100 meters to 1,000, makes systematic survey effectively impossible. What is known about it comes from nets hauled through it, from acoustic measurements made from above, from the tags attached to animals that move through it every day, and from the contents of those animals' stomachs. The sperm whale is, among other things, a sampling device. It descends into the mesopelagic zone more than 100 times a day across the whole range of its distribution, and it returns to the surface with whatever it captured below. The stomach contents of stranded animals, recovered and analyzed by researchers on beaches and in laboratories, contain squid beaks, squid eyes, fish otoliths, and the hard fragments of animals that decompose more slowly than the soft tissue around them. These fragments constitute a record of what lives in the deep water below, wherever the whale was foraging, a record no net could assemble with the same geographical coverage or the same temporal depth. The whale does not assemble this record intentionally. It is hunting. The record is a consequence of the hunting, a byproduct of the energetic necessity that drives every dive, and it accumulates over the life of the animal, which can span more than 70 years, as a long, deep, uninterrupted log of what the mesopelagic zone contains. 70 years of diving, 70 years of descent, and click and terminal buzz and ascent. The number of individual dives over a life of that length, even accounting for the years when the animal was young and diving shallower and less often, runs into the hundreds of thousands, each one a mile or more of ocean traversed in darkness, the heart slowing at depth, the muscle oxygen spending itself out, the clicks traveling forward and returning with the shape of the dark water ahead. No dive taken twice, no two stretches of water identical, the scattering layer rising and falling with the light, the squid drifting and fleeing and approaching, the cold pressing in from every side. The stillness of the passive drift is perhaps the most unexpected thing in all of this. In an animal built for such sustained and precise acoustic activity, the click train, the narrowing beam, the terminal buzz, the deliberate choice to go entirely silent, to stop swimming, to hang in the deep water as a large and quiet and slowly drifting object, is something that the behavior of almost no other predator prepares you to expect. And yet the tags record it repeatedly across multiple individuals in deep water during foraging dives. The whale hangs there. The cold water moves around it in its slow currents. The heart beats 4 times, then 5. The darkness presses in from every direction, and the whale does not fight it, and does not flee it, and does not fill it with sound. It simply rests inside it, still and vast and warm, and waits for the dark to bring something close. The clicks will come again. They always come again. The descent will resume, the tail strokes resuming their long, patient drive through the water column, and the pulses will reach forward into whatever the ocean holds ahead. But in this moment, in the suspended interval of the drift, the animal is simply present in the deep, a warm and breathing and unhurried thing, held in the cold, going nowhere, needing nothing from the water around it, except whatever the water chooses to bring. The darkness continues in all directions. It has continued for a long time. It will continue when the whale is gone, and the clicks will not be there to read it anymore, and the deep water will move in its slow, ancient currents through a silence unbroken by the pulse of any foraging animal, the same darkness and the same cold and the same slow drift of marine snow falling through it, unchanged, unmarked, continuing its long and patient course through the deep interior of the sea. But the whale is here now, and the drift is not over yet. And the clicks, when they come, will find what is there. The blow rises from the left side of the head, angled forward at 45 degrees, leaning into the air above the water, like something unhurried and certain of its direction. It is not the tall vertical column of a blue whale or the paired spout of a right whale. It is its own shape entirely, tilted, asymmetric, rising perhaps 15 feet before it spreads and thins and dissolves in the open air above the surface of the ocean. And then the whale breathes again, and the blow rises again, at the same angle, the same lean, the same quiet insistence, and anyone watching from a boat or ashore could identify the animal from that shape alone, from that single exhaled signature written briefly in the air and then erased. The whale is at the surface now, after an hour in the dark below. After the cold and the pressure and the long silence of the deep water, the animal lies at the boundary between ocean and air and breathes. Each breath is deep in a way that has no comparison in a human body. Where a resting person moves perhaps a fifth of the lung's total volume with each ordinary breath, the sperm whale moves 9/10 of it. A near complete exchange, the old air pushed out and fresh air drawn in until the lungs have been washed clean and refilled almost entirely. The blow disperses, the whale breathes again. The interval between breaths is roughly 12 to 15 seconds, not hurried, not labored, simply the pace the body requires to do what it must do. The surface recovery is not rest, precisely. It is work of a different kind. Down in the muscle tissue, in the dark flesh that holds so much oxygen it appears nearly black in daylight, the chemistry of the dive is being unwound. During the deepest part of the foraging run, where the whale moved and hunted and produced its long trains of clicking sound, some of the muscles' work passed beyond what oxygen could sustain. The cells continued, drawing on reserves and running the reactions that do not require a breath, but those reactions leave something behind. Lactic acid accumulates in the tissue, a byproduct of effort at the edge of endurance, and now the body must process it. Oxygen moves back into the blood with each long, slow breath. The acid clears gradually across the minutes of surface recovery, and the muscles return to a state from which another dive can begin. The whale does not know this is happening. The body runs the chemistry on its own, patient and thorough, while the animal simply breathes. The blow rises again, slightly forward, slightly left, catching the afternoon light. The ocean around the whale is a deep blue-gray at the surface and becomes something else entirely below, a gradient of dimming color that passes through green, then a blue so dark it carries no warmth, then nothing visible at all. Where the whale was an hour ago, at roughly 1,000 meters down, the water is near 3 degrees Celsius. The pressure there is 100 times the pressure at the surface, more than 100 atmospheres bearing down on every surface from every direction at once. There is no light of any kind. There has not been light there at any hour of any day since the ocean formed, and from that place the whale rose slowly back through all of it, through every gradient of pressure and temperature and darkness, and arrived here at the surface, blowing in the afternoon. The 15 minutes of recovery pass like a slow exhalation. The blow becomes less frequent as the body catches up with itself. The lactic acid falls below the threshold where it matters. The oxygen stores in the blood, and the muscle refill past the level needed for the next descent. The bradycardia of the deep dive has released. The heart, which slowed to perhaps 6 beats per minute at depth while the blood withdrew from the fins and outer muscles and gathered around the brain and heart, now runs at its surface pace again, steady and unremarkable. The whale rests at the surface in the way that animals in open ocean rest, not sleeping, not entirely still, simply present in the shallower world and breathing through it. There are other whales nearby, a group of females and young animals, the social core of the species, because adult males range mostly alone across much of the year, move at the surface in the same slow recovery pattern. Their blows appear across the water at irregular intervals, each one that same forward-leaning plume, each one dispersing and reforming with the next breath. The young animals surface more often. Their smaller bodies carry less oxygen relative to their metabolic needs, and so their dives are shorter, their recovery intervals briefer, their presence at the surface more frequent than the adults, who can hold 1,000 meters for an hour without surfacing. The group drifts together in a loose cluster, breathing, the ocean moving beneath them in long, slow swells. In the late afternoon, something changes in the behavior of the group, though it happens slowly and without announcement. The blows space out. The movement at the surface grows quieter. The animals, one by one, take on a posture that has no clear parallel in any other large whale. They orient vertically in the water, blunt heads just at the waterline, their bodies hanging downward into the blue beneath them, motionless. They are not diving. They are not feeding. They are not socializing in any way that involves sound or movement. They simply hang there, at the surface, heads up and bodies down, still, breathing at long intervals, present in the way that a sleeping animal is present, which is to say, partly elsewhere. The best understanding of this posture is that it is sleep. A study of wild sperm whales documented groups spending roughly 7% of their time in exactly this configuration, vertical, motionless, at or near the surface, unresponsive to nearby boats, until the vessel came within a few meters of them. The animals appeared to be unconscious, or close to it. Sperm whales, like other cetaceans, are thought to sleep with one hemisphere of the brain at a time, the other hemisphere remaining active enough to manage the breathing that cannot ever become truly involuntary in an air-breathing animal that lives its whole life in water, half asleep and half awake, hanging vertically in the open ocean, present enough to breathe and absent enough to rest. The blunt head just clears the surface. The body below it tapers downward, the broad flukes hanging at some depth, faintly visible in clear water as two dark lobes. The skin is dark gray, deeply creased and marked with the history of decades, the pale circular scars left by squid encounters, the longer rake marks from contact with other whales or with objects in the water, the irregular patches that accumulate on any large, long-lived animal that has spent a life in motion through a world full of things that leave impressions. The sperm whale is not a smooth animal. It is an animal that has been somewhere, and the body carries that. Beneath the sleeping group, the ocean continues downward without them. At 100 meters, the water is dim and cool, still visited by the longest wavelengths of sunlight on a clear day, still containing the shallow water organisms that gather near the light. At 300 meters, the last useful light is gone. At 500 meters, the water is a cold, still blue-black, and the deep scattering layer is already present, a broad band of small organisms distributed through the mid-water column, dense enough in aggregate to reflect sound, dense enough to register on sonar as though it were a continuous surface, though it is not a surface but a population, millions of individual animals hanging in the water in a loose coordinated assembly. The deep scattering layer moves. This is one of the ocean's oldest and least witnessed rhythms, a daily vertical migration governed entirely by light. At dawn, the organisms descend, pulling away from the brightening surface, retreating back into the dark water where the light cannot follow. At dusk, they rise, ascending through hundreds of meters of water column over the course of a few hours, climbing toward the surface and the productivity that collects there when the sun is gone. The migration is driven by small squid, by lanternfishes, by copepods and krill, and the larvae of things that live their whole lives in darkness, and they perform this transit every day without interruption, a pulse in the ocean's body that has been running for longer than the sperm whale has existed as a species. The whale that dove an hour ago dropped down through this layer on the descent, passing through the cloud of rising organisms in the early evening and descending past them into the quieter water below. The layer was not empty. It never is. But the deepest prey, the giant squid, the colossal squid, the largest and most nutritious items in the sperm whale's range, occupy deeper water than the scattering layer. They are below it, waiting in the permanent cold, and reaching them requires the full depth of the dive, the full hour of submersion, the full energetic investment that each descent demands. An adult sperm whale requires roughly a ton of food each day to maintain its body. A ton is nearly 2,000 pounds, enough weight that if it were gathered in one place, it would be immediately and heavily visible. But gathered over the ocean floor, distributed across hundreds of squid and fish, caught individually in dozens of dives, spread across the entire metabolic surface area of an animal that can be 60 feet long and weigh as much as 45 tons, the number becomes something else. A rate, a daily necessity, a quiet energetic obligation that every dive either partly fulfills or does not. There is no drama in it. The requirement is simply there, and the diving, and the hunting, and the surfacing, and the breathing, and the diving again are the body's steady answer to it, across years and decades of a life that can span more than 70 years in the open ocean. The sleeping group drifts, the swells pass beneath them. A large female breathes once, slowly, the blow angling forward in the late day air, and then is still again. The water below the group is a mile deep at this location, a mile of water, a mile of falling pressure, a mile of diminishing light and falling temperature, and then the seafloor, covered in sediment that has been accumulating grain by grain since long before the first sperm whale breathed. Marine snow drifts downward through all of it, the constant slow fall of dead plankton, shed scales, fecal pellets, fragments of larger animals, threads of mucus released by filter-feeding organisms near the surface. The snow falls through every depth, crossing the scattering layer and passing below it, settling eventually onto the seafloor in a layer that grows imperceptibly thicker with each decade. The sperm whale is not the deepest diver in the ocean. That record belongs to a different animal, quieter in its habits, less visible from the surface, and almost never seen in any condition where its nature can be well observed. The Cuvier's beaked whale, a smaller animal, reaching perhaps 20 feet in length, and built along less dramatic lines than the great squared head of the sperm whale, holds the documented record among all marine mammals for both the deepest and the longest dive. A single tagged individual was recorded descending past 2,900 meters, nearly 2 miles below the surface. Another individual was tracked underwater for 2 hours and 57 minutes without surfacing. These numbers come from tags, from the patient accumulation of data gathered by researchers who attached recording instruments to individual animals and then waited to see what the animals did with the ocean around them. What the Cuvier's beaked whale does with the ocean is go deeper and stay longer than anything else that breathes air. The physiology that allows this is not entirely understood. The animal has some of the same adaptations as the sperm whale, the oxygen-storing myoglobin, the collapsible rib cage, the capacity to reduce heart rate and redirect blood during a dive. But taken further in some respects, or distributed differently, or paired with behavioral strategies that have not yet been fully mapped. At nearly 3,000 meters, The pressure exceeds 290 atmospheres. The whale descends into it, hunts and returns. The record it holds is attached to a number measured by a machine on a single animal on one occasion, and the rest of its life, the hundreds of dives before and after, remain invisible. The sperm whale that surfaced an hour ago dove to perhaps 1,000 meters. 1,000 meters is not 3,000. In depth, in pressure, in the duration of the breath hold, the sperm whale yields the record to its smaller relative. And yet the sperm whale is the animal whose ecological presence in the deep ocean is most legible, most large, most written into the physical record of the ocean itself. The scars on whale skin tell the story of encounters at depth. The fragments of giant squid beaks found in sperm whale stomachs tell the story of a predator reaching into a part of the ocean that no other warm-blooded animal of comparable size consistently visits. The spermaceti organ and the junk, the clicking sound that travels ahead of the animal like a moving hand, feeling the dark water for what is in it, the heart that slows to 4 beats a minute in the cold, all of it is the accumulated answer to a single problem: how to be this large in the deep ocean and sustain it. The afternoon moves into early evening, and the light on the water's surface changes from the flat brightness of midday to something warmer and lower and more diffuse. The sleeping group remains at the surface. The blows continue at long intervals, each one the same, forward-leaning plume, catching the low light, dispersing in the air above the swells. Below the group, the deep scattering layer is beginning its evening ascent, rising slowly toward the surface as the light at the top of the water column fades. The organisms in the layer are moving upward through 100 meters, 200 meters, drawn toward the productivity of the surface, now that the light will not expose them. And below the layer, in the deep water, the layer has vacated. The large squid continue their own existence, arms drifting, jet propulsion ready, the slow chemistry of a cold water predator running in the dark. The ocean does not know that the whales are sleeping at its surface. The migration does not pause. The marine snow continues falling. The seafloor a mile below receives its imperceptible increment. The cold water at depth holds its temperature with a steadiness that human seasons do not touch. It was near 3 degrees Celsius this morning, and it will be near 3 degrees Celsius next month, and it has been near 3 degrees Celsius at this latitude and this depth for longer than the species that now sleeps at the surface has existed. The cold is not cruel, it simply is. It is the temperature of water that has not been near the surface in decades, that sank somewhere far from here and flowed along the bottom and rose slowly and will circulate for centuries before it sees the sun again. A young sperm whale surfaces near the adult female, blowing several times in quick succession, its smaller lungs recovering faster, its body needing the air more frequently. It moves closer to the adult and then stills, hanging at the surface in its own version of the vertical resting posture. The two animals breathe in the same place, at the same slow rhythm, separated by the difference in age and size that will take another decade or more to fully close. The young whale's skin is dark gray and relatively unmarked. There are no sucker scars yet. The body has not yet been to the depths where the large squid wait, and the record of encounters that will eventually texture the animal's skin has not yet been written. Right now, it is only breathing, resting beside the larger animal in the quiet water, the ocean beneath it, deep and full, and going on without witness in every direction. The last light is leaving the surface of the water now. The sky above is cooling into the deeper blues of early evening, and the ocean surface takes on that color, reflecting it back and adding its own darkness. The shadows of the whales on the water beside them lengthen and then dissolve as the direct light goes. The blows when they rise are still visible, white plumes catching what remains in the sky above, but the animals themselves are harder to see now, dark shapes against a dark surface, their mass present, but their edges uncertain. Far below, where it has been dark at every hour, nothing changes with the sunset. The pressure at 900 meters does not shift. The temperature at 1200 meters does not change because the sky above the ocean has gone from blue to black. The deep ocean is insulated from the surface not just by water, but by time. What reaches it has been delayed by circulation and by distance, and what arrives is not the weather, but something older and slower. A thermal change at the surface might take decades to reach a depth of 1,000 meters. A chemical change might take longer. The deep water is the ocean's memory, slow and patient, carrying in its currents information from far away and long ago. On the skin of the resting adult female, the sucker scars are visible even in the low light if the water is calm and someone is close enough to see. The rings are pale against the darker skin, dozens of them on the flanks, around the head, across the lower jaw. The largest are wider than a human palm, and the tissue that surrounds them has healed and thickened over years until the scars have become features rather than wounds, as permanent as any other marking on the animal's body. They were made in the dark, 1,000 meters or more below the surface, at a moment that lasted perhaps seconds, in the grip of an animal whose own body the whale never clearly saw. The echo of it returned something, a shape, a size, a density, and the whale approached, and the squid gripped what it could in defense, and the encounter resolved in the way most of them resolve, and the whale rose again through the dark water, carrying what it had found. The record of that encounter is in the skin. The record of all the encounters is in the skin, each ring a moment preserved in tissue, the body a kind of archive of the deep water. An animal that has lived for 50 years carries 50 years of those records. The oldest and largest individuals carry the deepest archive, written in the widest scars, the most numerous rings, the most layered evidence of a life conducted largely in the dark, at depth, beyond the reach of any light. The group at the surface is still. The vertical sleeping posture has settled across most of the animals, and the blows come now at such long intervals that minutes pass between them. The body of a sleeping sperm whale moves only with the swells, a slow rise and fall, adrift with whatever surface current is running, a passive presence in the water, the way a log is present, or a piece of floating wood, except that the wood does not breathe, does not carry its blood in precise cellular reservoirs of oxygen, does not hold within its massive dark-fleshed body the capacity to descend, at will, to a depth that would crush any other large mammal completely. The capacity is resting now. The anatomy that makes the deep possible, the collapsible rib cage, the dense myoglobin, the blood thick with hemoglobin, the spermaceti organ that fills the forward third of the great blunt head, is simply present in the sleeping animal, unremarkable and quiet. The organ does not announce itself. The blood does not declare its oxygen concentration. The ribs simply rest in the configuration they take at the surface, loose and opened, and will fold inward only when the animal descends. Every structure that belongs to the deep is present here at the surface in a kind of readiness that requires nothing right now. Readiness without urgency. The animal carries its whole capacity into its sleep and its surface breathing and its slow drift on the ocean swells, the way any creature carries what it is through every moment, whether that moment calls on it or not. The sperm whale is in its sleeping surface posture as fully a deep ocean hunter as it is a mile below. The structures are the same. The blood is the same. The acoustic anatomy packed into that great square head is the same. Only the circumstances are different. Only the depth is different. The ocean beneath the sleeping group goes on being the ocean. 1,000 meters below the sleeping whales, a squid moves through the dark water, its chromatophores dimming and brightening in patterns too faint to matter, in a world where there are no eyes to read them. Its arms trailing slightly as it orients on some current or some sound it has detected through the vibration-sensitive cells along its lateral line. It is not aware of the animals at the surface. The distance and the darkness and the silence between them is total. The squid will spend its whole life in this depth, in this cold, and will either be caught by something moving through the dark water or will die another way, and the ocean will take it back, in either case, through the slow chemistry of decomposition that turns all things back into their component parts, which drift downward as marine snow and settle on the floor and are taken up again by whatever lives there, in whatever form that requires. Everything that enters the ocean stays in the ocean for a very long time. The sperm whale, when it eventually dies of age or of injury or of the slow failure of a body that has worked for 7 decades, will sink. A whale fall is the name given to this event and to its long aftermath, the carcass descending through all the water column, slowly, taking hours or days to reach the floor, arriving there as a massive concentrated gift of organic matter to the seafloor community. Hagfish and sleeper sharks come first, then the smaller organisms, then the bone-eating worms called osedacs, which bore into the lipid-rich skeleton and break it down over years, releasing nutrients that support entire small communities of organisms that would not otherwise be there. A large sperm whale carcass can sustain a whale fall community for decades, long after the flesh is gone, long after the most visible signs of the animal have dissolved. The bones continue to release what they hold, and the community continues to build itself around that release. The whale sleeping now at the surface has never thought about this. It does not think about the deep either, in any way that resembles the human habit of imagining the future. It breathes, it rests. Its brain runs at half its capacity, one hemisphere active and one at rest. The chemistry of sleep and wakefulness running in parallel in the same skull that, while active and diving, directed the whole intricate machinery of a deep ocean hunt. The brain is the same brain in both states. The sleep of a sperm whale is not a cessation, it is a redistribution. The swells continue to move under the sleeping animals. Each swell is a small transfer of energy, wind energy, from some distant storm, converted into a shape that moves across the surface of the ocean for hundreds of miles before it reaches this place and passes under these animals and continues beyond them toward whatever shore is eventually in its path. The whales rise slightly on each swell and fall slightly after it, without waking, without noticing. The ocean's motion is the oldest motion on the planet's surface, older than the whales, older than the ancestors of the whales, older than the land animals from which those ancestors descended to the water 50 million years ago. The swells ran across this ocean before there were any warm-blooded animals to feel them. The dark is coming fully now. The last light has left the upper edge of the sky, and the stars are visible, faint at first, then clear, distributed across the black above the ocean in the patterns that have not changed in any human lifetime, and that will not change in any number of human lifetimes stacked together, because the stars are far enough that their relative positions shift on timescales, the mind can name but not truly inhabit. The whales at the surface cannot see the stars. Their eyes, when open, face sideways and downward, and are adapted for seeing in low light and through water. But the stars are above them, and the ocean is below them, and the animals are in between, resting at the boundary of two vast things, breathing the air on one side, drawn by anatomy and habit to the water on the other. Another blow rises from somewhere in the group, unhurried, angled, dissolving, and the whale that produced it settles back into stillness. The blow disperses above the dark water and is gone. The water closes around the group's slow breathing and their vertical drift, and the sound of the ocean at night is not silence, but something close to it, a low, broad texture of water moving against water, of swells passing, of air just above the surface, carrying a faint sibilance that is the ocean breathing. Nothing the human ear would call loud, nothing the night would call unusual, only the ordinary continuation of the ocean doing what the ocean does, at the surface and below it, and in every depth beneath that, running its cold and its chemistry and its biology in the dark. The sleeping whales drift south in the current, a few meters per hour, the group holding loosely together without any of them actively maintaining the formation. The current carries them gently. The blows come and go, rising and dispersing and rising again. The marine snow falls through the water below them at a pace too slow to call movement, too steady to call stillness. A few meters per day, a fall so gentle it does not disturb the cold layers it passes through, only crosses them, downward toward the floor. On the floor, at the base of all this water, the sediment is soft and deep, and has been receiving what falls from above for so long that the layers it contains go back to periods when the ocean above it looked different, held different animals, and was bounded by continents arranged in configurations no longer visible on any current map. The sperm whale group will wake when the body calls for it, when the oxygen balance shifts, when the hormonal signals that govern sleep cycle through to the other side, when some sound in the water resolves into a pattern the active hemisphere flags as worth attending to. One of the animals will lift its head, orient, breathe more rapidly for a few minutes, and then the group will begin to move. They will dive again in the evening when the scattering layer has risen closer to the surface and the hunting is different in character from the deep hunts of the afternoon. Or they will continue to rest through the night and dive in the morning when the light returns to the surface above and the squid below retreat deeper and the long descent begins again. There is no resolution in this. The diving and the resting and the breathing at the surface are not leading anywhere. They are not building toward a conclusion. They are the life, in its daily form, a cycle that runs without interruption across the full span of the animal's decades, varying only in the details of weather and prey abundance, and the composition of the group and the health of each individual body. The sperm whale does not live toward a moment. It lives continuously, as all animals do, the present extending in both directions without border. The group drifts in the full dark now, their blows visible only as lighter shapes against the dark sky above the water. The ocean beneath them is a mile deep, and is exactly what it has always been at this hour, cold, dark, patient, and full of the slow work of living things, doing what living things do in the permanent night below the surface world. The squid drift, the marine snow falls, the sediment accumulates, the cold water circulates in its long paths through the deep ocean basin, going where the differences in temperature and salinity direct it, taking decades for the transit, carrying the dissolved remnants of everything that has lived and died in the water above it. The whales rest at the surface of this, blunt heads just at the waterline, bodies hanging down into the dark below, the great squared off head of the adult female holding within it the spermaceti organ, and the acoustic architecture, and the dense dark muscle, and the blood that carries more than a human body could ever carry. All of it present, all of it resting, suspended at the boundary between the ocean and the air. The blow rises once more. A long moment passes. Another blow, from somewhere farther in the group.